Hey guys, if you're a big fan of true horror stories, you would definitely enjoy this video. As always, subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this to be suggested for you. It also helps me out too. Enjoy the stories. It was a Wednesday evening, and like any other day, I was sprawled on my couch scrolling through Craigslist. I had recently moved to a new city and was still trying to figure out how to fill my time. I didn't have much of a social life yet, so the endless listings for odd jobs and random items caught my eye. I was looking for something to do, maybe find a little side hustle or even a quirky item to decorate my new apartment. That's when I stumbled upon a post that read, "Looking for a house sitter, free room and board." At first, I thought it was too good to be true. The ad was vague, just a few sentences with no details about why they needed a house sitter or what the house was like. The poster had no pictures, and their profile was bare, which made me a little uneasy. But curiosity got the better of me. I mean, if they were offering free room and board, what did I have to lose? I shot off a quick email, introducing myself and mentioning that I was new to town and looking for a change of scenery. To my surprise, I got a response almost immediately. The poster, who went by the name of Mark, briefed me on the situation. He explained that he needed someone to look after his house while he was away on a business trip. He didn't specify what kind of business, but he assured me it would be a short stay, just a week or so. He gave me his address and invited me to come over that weekend to check out the place and discuss the details in person. With a mix of excitement and anxiety, I decided to go. The house was located in a quiet, suburban neighborhood, far from the hustle and bustle of the city. As I drove up, I couldn't help but notice how eerily perfect the place looked. The lawn was meticulously manicured, and the house itself had a vintage charm that made it stand out. It was one of those homes you'd see in movies, with a wraparound porch and a white picket fence. Mark greeted me at the door, and I was struck by his demeanor. He was friendly, but had an unsettling intensity about him that I couldn't quite put my finger on. He led me through the house, showing me the spacious living room, the old-fashioned kitchen, and the bedrooms. Everything was clean, almost too clean, as if it had been staged for a magazine shoot. I noticed a few family photos scattered around, but they seemed off, like they had been taken in a different time, showcasing a different version of the house. As we walked around, Mark casually mentioned that he had a hobby he was passionate about. He didn't elaborate much, but he seemed to light up when he spoke about it. I brushed it off, thinking he was just an eccentric guy. After touring the house, we settled down on the porch with iced tea. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the yard, and I felt an odd mix of comfort and unease. Eventually, we got back to business. Mark explained that all I had to do was keep the house tidy, water the plants, and make sure everything stayed in order. He told me he'd leave a list of instructions for me, but it would be pretty straightforward. I agreed to the arrangement, thinking that it would be a great way to save some money while getting to know the area. That weekend, I moved in. The first few days were uneventful. I spent my mornings exploring the neighborhood and my evenings reading on the porch. But as the week progressed, I started noticing strange things. The house, with its vintage charm, had an unsettling quality. At night, the creaks and groans of the old wooden floors echoed through the halls, making it hard to sleep. I brushed it off as typical old house noises, but there was something else, an indescribable weight in the air, a feeling that I was being watched. One evening while I was cleaning the attic, I discovered a dusty box tucked away in the corner. My curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it. Inside were various items: old photographs, letters, and some peculiar trinkets. The photographs were of different families, all posing in front of the house. The same house, but the people looked decades apart, their clothing styles changing with each era. I couldn't shake the feeling that each family had a story, a history that lingered in the walls. I spent hours sifting through the items, piecing together fragments of lives that had come and gone. The letters spoke of love, loss, and tragedy, the kind of stuff that gives you chills. I felt like I was intruding on something sacred, but I couldn't help myself. I was drawn in deeper. As the days turned into nights, I noticed that Mark would call occasionally, checking in to see how I was doing. His tone had shifted. He seemed more interested in what I was doing in the house than how I was enjoying my stay. He asked about the attic, about whether I had found anything interesting. It felt invasive, and I started to wonder if he was keeping tabs on me. One night, something snapped in me. I was lying in bed, tossing and turning, when I heard a soft thud upstairs. It seemed to echo through the quiet house, and my heart raced. I convinced myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, but the noise persisted, footsteps slow and deliberate. I grabbed a flashlight and tiptoed up to the attic. The door was slightly ajar, and I could feel my pulse quicken as I pushed it open. What I saw made my stomach drop. The box I had found was wide open, its contents strewn across the floor. But it wasn't just the mess that terrified me. It was the fact that all the photographs were gone, every single one. In their place, there was a single note hastily scrawled. "You shouldn't have looked." Panic surged through me, and I bolted back downstairs, my mind racing. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was no longer alone in the house. I called Mark, but he didn't answer. I decided to leave, packing my bags as quickly as I could. Just as I was about to walk out the front door, I heard it again, the soft thud of footsteps coming down the stairs. I didn't wait to see if it was Mark or something else. I bolted out, nearly tripping over myself in my haste. I jumped into my car and sped away, my heart pounding in my chest. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror one last time, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw a figure standing on the porch, watching me leave. I never returned to that house. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had happened there was far beyond my understanding. I often think about that week, how something that seemed like an innocent opportunity turned into a nightmare. Sometimes I still check Craigslist, but I skip the house-sitting ads. Some doors are better left closed, and some houses, well, they hold secrets best left buried. I never thought I'd find myself scrolling through Craigslist late at night, but there I was half-heartedly looking for a used couch or a cheap bike. You know how it goes. The boredom creeps in, and you start looking for anything to fill the void. I was in my small apartment, the glow of my laptop screen illuminating the shadows. It was just a way to kill time until I could finally drift off to sleep. But as I scrolled, something unusual caught my eye. It was a post in the free section labeled simply as furniture and more. The first few lines piqued my interest. The poster claimed they were moving and needed to get rid of everything in their house by the end of the week. There was a long list of items, a vintage couch, some end tables, and a couple chairs. But what really stood out was the phrase, "other items available for the curious." That line lingered in my mind. What could that possibly mean? I couldn't help but wonder what more could be. Curiosity got the better of me, and I shot off an email asking for more details about the intriguing other items. Within an hour, I received a reply. The response was brief, almost cryptic. The poster mentioned that they had collectibles that were not for the faint of heart. I felt a chill run down my spine, but also a surge of adrenaline. I had to know what it was, so I flipped my laptop shut and decided to check it out. The next day, I drove to the address listed in the email. It was in a sketchy part of town, a neighborhood I'd only heard stories about. The houses were old and worn down, some with broken windows and peeling paint. I parked in front of a dilapidated two-story home that seemed to sag under its own weight. My heart raced as I approached the front door, unsure of what awaited me. When I knocked, there was a long pause before the door creaked open. The person who answered was an older man, probably in his 60s. He had wild, unkempt hair and a deep-set gaze that made me feel uneasy. He didn't say much, just stepped aside and gestured for me to come in. The inside of the house was dimly lit and cluttered, with boxes piled high everywhere. The air smelled stale, like it hadn't been properly ventilated in years. As I stepped further inside, I was hit with an overwhelming sense of disarray. Old furniture was piled in corners, and stacks of newspapers littered the floor. In the back room, I could see a glimmer of something shiny. The man led me through the maze of clutter, and I couldn't help but notice oddities scattered throughout. There were jars filled with strange contents, some kind of taxidermy in various states of decay, and what looked like old medical equipment. My curiosity morphed into dread as I followed him deeper into the house. He stopped in front of a door that looked like it hadn't been opened in ages. He turned to me and said there were special items in there, but I could see the gleam in his eye. It felt almost predatory, and I hesitated. But my curiosity pushed me forward. I nodded, and he opened the door. What lay inside was a small, dimly lit room, and my heart sank. The walls were lined with shelves filled with jars, each containing what looked like human remains. Some were small, maybe pieces of fingers or toes, while others were larger, more grotesque. There were skulls arranged on one shelf, and I felt bile rise in my throat. I realized I was standing in a room that felt like a macabre museum of horrors. The man stood behind me, his presence looming like a dark cloud. He explained that he collected unusual items, things others would throw away. I couldn't process what I was hearing. My mind raced with thoughts of how to escape, but my feet felt glued to the floor. It was surreal, like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I glanced around, trying to keep my composure. There were photos taped to the walls, faded images of people I didn't recognize, some looking terrified. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. There was something inherently wrong about this place, something that made my skin crawl. I suddenly realized I was in over my head. I took a step back, trying to distance myself from the grotesque collection. The man noticed my discomfort and grinned, a wide, unsettling smile that revealed too many teeth. He told me he had more than just remnants of the past. He had artifacts from different cultures, some of which were rumored to hold dark powers. My mind reeled at the thought. As I backed away towards the door, I could feel the weight of his gaze on me. I needed to get out of there. The curiosity that had driven me to this house now felt like a dangerous mistake. I turned and rushed out, pushing past him and nearly stumbling over the clutter in the hallway. My heart raced as I reached the front door, flinging it open and stepping out into the cool air. My car felt like a sanctuary as I climbed inside and locked the doors. I sat there for a moment, catching my breath, my mind spinning with what I had just witnessed. I drove away, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. As I navigated the streets, I couldn't shake the images from my mind. The jars, the skulls, the man's unsettling grin. Weeks passed, and I tried to forget about that house and the horrors inside. But every time I opened my laptop, the memory crept back in. I couldn't help but think about how easily I could have become another item in that collection. The thought haunted me, and I found myself checking Craigslist less and less. It was a strange experience that changed something in me. I realized some curiosities are better left unexplored. Sometimes what seems like a simple search for a couch can lead you to places you never wanted to go. I still think about that day, the things I saw, and that chilling smile. It's a reminder that some doors are better left closed, no matter how tempting the invitation may seem. You know how people say you can find anything on Craigslist? Well, I used to think that was just a cliche until I stumbled upon something that still haunts me. It all started on a rainy Tuesday afternoon when I was bored out of my mind, scrolling through the endless sea of ads. I was looking for some random furniture for my new apartment, but I got sidetracked by the free section. It was a treasure trove of oddities, everything from broken down couches to mismatched coffee tables. But then my eyes landed on something different, something that didn't quite fit the typical Craigslist mold. The listing was simple, just a few lines of text and a blurry picture. It said something like, "Free to a good home, vintage mannequin. Excellent condition. Must pick up. Serious inquiries only." I found myself staring at the image, a slightly creepy, lifelike mannequin in what looked like an old-fashioned dress. It had a porcelain face that seemed almost too perfect, and for reasons I can't quite explain, I felt an odd pull toward it. Maybe it was the idea of having a quirky piece of decor, or perhaps it was the thrill of the hunt, but something about that mannequin sparked my curiosity. So I shot off an email, not really thinking it would lead anywhere. To my surprise, I got a response almost immediately. The sender, who went by H, gave me an address and told me to come by that evening. My heart raced as I grabbed my keys and headed out. The address was in a sketchy part of town, but I convinced myself that I could handle it. After all, I was just picking up a mannequin, right? When I arrived at the rundown house, the paint was peeling, and the yard was a jungle of overgrown weeds. A chill ran down my spine, but I brushed it off as just nerves. I knocked on the door, and after what felt like an eternity, it creaked open. The person who stood before me was not what I expected. H was an older gentleman, maybe in his 60s, with wild hair and a gaze that seemed to pierce right through me. His clothes were worn and tattered, and he had an unsettling smile that made me feel uneasy. He welcomed me in, and I stepped inside, trying to ignore the feeling of dread creeping up my spine. The house was dimly lit, filled with odd trinkets and clutter. There were old photographs on the walls, all of people I didn't recognize, and the air smelled musty, like it hadn't been aired out in years. H led me to a room in the back where the mannequin stood, draped in a faded sheet. As he pulled it back to reveal the figure, I felt a shiver run down my spine. It was more lifelike than I remembered, the porcelain skin almost glistening in the low light. H seemed to notice my reaction and began to ramble on about the mannequin's history. He claimed it belonged to a relative who had been an artist, and that it was used as a model for various projects. I nodded along, trying to mask my discomfort, but every word he spoke sent alarm bells ringing in my head. There was something off about the way he talked. Too passionate, too eager. I just wanted to grab the mannequin and leave, but I was stuck listening to this strange man's monologue. Finally, I managed to wrestle the conversation back to the mannequin itself. H helped me load it into my car, and as I drove away, I felt a strange sense of relief. I had the mannequin, and it was mine, but that relief was short-lived. The moment I got home and set it in my living room, I felt a shift in the atmosphere. The house felt colder, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The first few nights with a mannequin were uneventful, but then weird things started happening. I'd hear faint noises at odd hours, like whispers or shuffling sounds. One night, I woke up to find a mannequin had shifted slightly. I brushed it off as my imagination playing tricks on me. After all, it was just a doll, right? But then I noticed something even stranger. It seemed to have a habit of appearing in different poses. One day, I found it with its arms crossed, and the next, it was leaning slightly forward as if it was trying to get closer to me. I tried to convince myself it was just my mind playing tricks, but deep down, I felt like something was very wrong. I started avoiding the living room altogether, and my friends began to notice my strange behavior. They joked about the creepy mannequin, but I could see the flicker of concern in their eyes. As the days turned into weeks, the occurrences escalated. I'd wake up to find a mannequin in different rooms, even though I was sure I'd left it in the living room. I became paranoid, convinced that someone was sneaking into my house to move it around. I even considered getting rid of it, but something kept me tethered to it. I had invested too much time and energy into acquiring it, and part of me was still fascinated by its odd beauty. One fateful night, I decided to confront my fears. I set up a camera in the living room, determined to capture any strange happenings while I slept. I went to bed feeling a mix of dread and excitement, my heart racing as I drifted off. When I reviewed the footage the next day, I was horrified. I could see the mannequin slowly turning its head towards the camera, its expression shifting ever so slightly, like it was alive and aware. That was it for me. I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to return the mannequin to H, convinced that it was cursed or something. I drove back to that rundown house, my heart pounding in my chest. When I knocked, H answered almost immediately, as if he had been waiting for me. I handed him the mannequin, my hands trembling, and he looked at me with that same unsettling smile. He didn't say a word as he took the mannequin back, just nodded knowingly. I rushed out of the house, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders, but as I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had made a terrible mistake. I left that house behind, but something about that mannequin still lingers in my mind. I've never seen H again, nor have I dared to return to that part of town. Sometimes, late at night, I can almost hear the faint whispers echoing in my mind, and I wonder about the mannequin. I think about what might have happened had I kept it, how it could have changed my life forever. And that thought terrifies me more than any ghost story ever could. I was scrolling through Craigslist one night, probably around 2 in the morning, when I stumbled upon an ad that caught my attention. It wasn't the usual free couch or looking for a roommate kind of thing. This one was different. The title read something like Unique Opportunity, Help Needed. The poster didn't elaborate much, but they promised a hefty sum for just a few hours of simple work. Intrigued, I clicked on the ad. The poster described a rural property on the outskirts of town. They said they needed someone help with labor-intensive tasks, but didn't go into detail. They mentioned that the work was for an elderly man who had recently lost his wife and was struggling to keep up with the upkeep of his property. There was a sense of urgency in the way they wrote, as if they were really desperate for help. The pay was good, much better than any odd job I had done before. I figured I could spare a day, so I shot off an email expressing my interest. I didn't expect a reply, but within an hour, my phone buzzed. It was the poster, letting me know that they would call me in the morning to discuss it further. I tossed and turned that night, curiosity gnawing at me. Who was this man, and what kind of work did he really need done? I pushed the thoughts aside and eventually fell asleep. The next day, the phone call came. The voice on the other end was gruff but friendly. They gave me directions to the property, which was about a 30-minute drive from where I lived. I felt a mix of excitement and apprehension as I hung up. There was something about the whole situation that felt off, but the prospect of easy cash was too tempting to ignore. When I arrived at the property, it was a sprawling old farmhouse, surrounded by overgrown grass and a few dilapidated sheds. The place looked like it hadn't seen a good cleanup in years. I parked my car and took a deep breath, half expecting some kind of horror movie scenario to unfold. Instead, an elderly man came out to greet me. He looked like he had once been a robust figure, but was now frail and hunched over. His clothes were worn and faded, and his eyes held a strange mix of sadness and urgency. He led me inside the house, which was dark and musty. It felt like time had stood still. The decor was outdated, and the air was thick with dust. He explained that he needed help sorting through his late wife's belongings. I agreed without hesitation, thinking it would be a simple task. He seemed genuinely grateful for the help, but there was something unsettling in the way he watched me as I moved around the house. As I began sorting through boxes and drawers, I stumbled upon some odd items. There were old photographs of the man and his wife, but they all had a strange vibe. In some of them, the wife looked almost lifeless, her smile too wide and her eyes too vacant. I tried to shake off the unease and focused on the task at hand. The man was quiet, sitting in the corner, his gaze fixed on me. At times, I could feel him watching my every move, and it sent chills down my spine. After a couple of hours, I decided to take a break and grab some water. When I returned to the room, I noticed a strange smell. It was faint but pungent, like something had gone rotten. I asked the man if something was in the basement, and he just waved it off, mumbling something about old food. I didn't press the issue, but my instincts screamed at me to leave. Still, I pushed through, telling myself it was just a few more hours for a decent paycheck. The work was exhausting. I sorted through clothes, books, and more photographs. The deeper I dug, the more bizarre things became. I found a box filled with strange trinkets, dolls with missing eyes, rusted tools, and what looked like a collection of old locks. They seemed out of place, but I didn't say anything. The man just watched me, a strange glint in his eye that made me uncomfortable. As the day dragged on, I began to notice more oddities around the house. There were locked doors that I could see through the cracks, and oddly enough, I could hear something softly scraping against the walls behind them. I tried to ignore it, convincing myself it was just an old house settling, but I could feel my heart racing. The man was growing more and more erratic, mumbling to himself and occasionally glancing at the doors as if he were waiting for something or someone. Hours passed, and I finally reached a point where I had to confront him. I mentioned the smell and the noises, hoping he would ease my growing anxiety. Instead, he just chuckled in a way that felt entirely wrong. He leaned in closer, his breath stale and heavy, and told me not to worry about it. "It's just the past trying to get out," he said, and my stomach twisted. I decided I had enough. I gathered my things and told him I needed to leave. He didn't push back, just nodded slowly, that unsettling smile still plastered on his face. As I walked out, I made sure to keep my distance from him. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the yard, making everything feel more sinister. Just as I reached my car, I glanced back at the house one last time. The man stood in the doorway, watching me with an expression that sent a wave of dread through me. I jumped into my car, heart pounding, and sped off. The whole drive home, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. I kept glancing in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see his figure looming behind me. It wasn't until I finally reached my neighborhood that I allowed myself to breathe a sigh of relief. I never went back to that house, and I never answered another Craigslist ad again. Something about that day felt wrong, like I had brushed against a world that I wasn't meant to see. The memory of that man and his house lingers in my mind, a haunting reminder that sometimes curiosity can lead you down paths better left unexplored. I was scrolling through Craigslist one lazy Sunday afternoon, just killing time and trying to avoid the mountain of laundry that had accumulated over the week. You know how it is, one minute you're looking for a cheap couch, and the next minute you're knee-deep in weird ads, wondering how some people can even come up with the stuff they post. My eyes landed on an ad that seemed innocuous at first. It was a simple listing for a unique art installation being offered by a local artist. The images were bizarre but intriguing, depicting some kind of mixed media sculpture made from what looked like found objects. Curiosity piqued, I clicked on it. The artist's name was Jack, and he had a reputation for pushing boundaries, though his past work had always been on the quirky side. This time, however, there was something off about the photos. The sculptures were made from twisted metal, glass shards, and what appeared to be clothing. There was a haunting quality to them that I couldn't shake. The description said it was an interactive installation that would be set up in a vacant warehouse downtown for a weekend only. I felt a twinge of excitement and a hint of dread. I'd always had a taste for the unconventional, so I decided to check it out. The night of the installation, I donned an outfit that I hoped would make me look artsy and mysterious. I arrived at the warehouse, which loomed like a dark sentinel against the evening sky. There were a few cars parked outside, and I could hear faint music drifting through the cracked windows. I stepped inside, my senses overwhelmed by the dim light and a strange, metallic smell. The space was cavernous, and the sound echoed as I moved further in. The sculptures were arranged in a chaotic manner, creating narrow pathways that twisted and turned between them. As I walked through, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease creeping in. There was something unsettling about the way the pieces were constructed. They seemed to watch me as I moved, their sharp edges glinting under the flickering lights. I found myself drawn deeper into the installation, almost against my will. In one corner, a piece that looked like a distorted human figure was made from what I could only describe as remnants of clothing, shredded fabric, and leather stitched together in a grotesque semblance of a body. The face was obscured, but the hollow eyes seemed to follow me. I felt a shiver run down my spine. I could hear whispers now, low and indistinct, like the room itself was alive with secrets. I caught sight of a few other attendees, all as entranced as I was. They moved slowly, almost reverently, their eyes wide with a mix of fear and fascination. I overheard snippets of conversation that hinted at the darker themes Jack was exploring: trauma, loss, and human disconnection. It was all very profound, but the atmosphere was thick with something else, a palpable tension that made the back of my neck prickle. As I turned a corner, I stumbled upon a smaller room hidden behind one of the larger sculptures. The door was slightly ajar, and I pushed it open, compelled by an impulse I couldn't quite understand. Inside, the walls were covered in photographs, some framed, some just tacked up haphazardly. They depicted people in various states of distress, their faces twisted in anguish or fear. A chill settled in my chest as I realized these weren't random images. They were portraits of the same people whose clothes had been used in the sculptures. It was then I noticed a small table in the center of the room, cluttered with what looked like journals and sketchbooks. As I flipped through them, my heart raced. The pages were filled with erratic handwriting, ramblings about art, pain, and the human experience. But the deeper I got into it, the more disturbing the content became. Jack had documented interactions with these people. Some were friends, but many were strangers he'd met in dark places, bars, and alleyways. His fascination with their stories twisted into a kind of obsession, and it felt like I was trespassing in a sacred space. Suddenly, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned quickly, half expecting to see another attendee, but the room was empty. The oppressive silence enveloped me again, and I felt the urge to leave, but my feet felt glued to the floor. I took a deep breath and forced myself to step back into the main area of the installation, where the music had shifted to something more jarring, almost chaotic. The atmosphere had changed entirely. The whispers I'd heard earlier were now louder, almost frantic. People were milling about, but their expressions were different, wide and frantic, as though they were caught in a trance. I felt a cold wave wash over me. Something wasn't right. I scanned the room, and that's when I noticed Jack. He was standing in the center, his eyes wild and unblinking, a manic grin spreading across his face as he watched the crowd. I took a step back, heart racing, as his gaze locked onto mine. The thrill I'd felt earlier was gone, replaced by an overwhelming sense of dread. I turned to leave, weaving through the crowd, but they seemed to be closing in around me, lost in their own worlds, oblivious to the dark energy that had shifted in the room. I pushed my way past them, adrenaline pumping through my veins, desperate to escape. As I reached the exit, I glanced back one last time at Jack. He was still watching me, that unsettling grin plastered on his face, and I realized then that I wasn't just witnessing an art installation. I was witnessing something far more sinister, a twisted reflection of humanity that had become a living nightmare. I burst through the door and into the night, gasping for air as the cool breeze hit my face. I drove home in a daze, the visuals from that warehouse burned into my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had stumbled into something I wasn't meant to see, something dark and unsettling that had changed me in ways I couldn't yet comprehend. The next day, I went online to find anything about the installation, but the ad was gone, vanished without a trace. I never saw Jack or his art again, but the images haunted me, a reminder that sometimes curiosity leads you down paths you never wanted to explore. I never thought I'd find myself scrolling through Craigslist in the middle of the night, but there I was, insomnia creeping in like a thick fog around me. I was looking for anything to occupy my mind, maybe some random furniture or a weird antique that might tell an interesting story. I had heard the horror stories about Craigslist before, but nothing really prepared me for what I was about to stumble upon. There was a post titled, "Unique Opportunity." It caught my eye because it was vague yet tantalizing. The poster wrote about a special event happening that weekend in a secluded area outside the city. They mentioned it would be an unforgettable experience, a chance to connect with like-minded individuals, and even hinted at some exclusive activities that would be taking place. I was intrigued, maybe even a little too curious for my own good. I clicked on it, and after reading through the details, I felt a mix of excitement and caution. The location was described as a rustic cabin deep in the woods, far from any prying eyes. Who wouldn't want to spend a weekend in a cozy cabin, away from the hustle and bustle of daily life? I decided to check the comments. Most were skeptical, warning others about potential scams or weirdos. But some people seemed genuinely interested, sharing their own stories of past events that had been hosted by the same person. I felt a pull, a strange desire to be part of something different, something that would break the monotony of my dull routine. I shot off an email expressing my interest, half expecting to never hear back. But within hours, I received a reply with further details and a promise of an unforgettable weekend. As the day approached, my excitement grew, but so did my apprehension. I told myself I was being silly, that it was just a weekend getaway with strangers, but my gut was churning with unease. Still, I packed a bag with essentials, grabbed my phone, and set off to the meeting point specified in the email. The drive felt longer than it should have. The winding roads turned darker, the trees leaning in closer as if whispering secrets to one another. I finally reached the meeting point, a small gas station on the edge of town. I parked my car and waited, watching as a few other cars rolled in, each containing their own set of curious souls. Eventually, a tall guy with a scruffy beard and a baseball cap walked up. He had an easy smile and a friendly demeanor, and I felt instantly at ease. He introduced himself as the organizer, saying he'd be leading us to the cabin. We piled into a van, the atmosphere buzzing with nervous energy. The ride took us deeper into the woods, and as the trees closed in around us, I felt a shiver of anticipation. After what felt like an eternity, we arrived at the cabin. It was everything I had hoped for and more: rustic, charming, and nestled in a clearing surrounded by tall pines. The sun was beginning to set, casting an eerie glow over everything. Once inside, we were shown to our rooms. The cabin had a cozy feel, with wooden beams and a stone fireplace. It was nice, but there was something about it that felt off. The air was thick, heavy, with an unexplainable tension. I shrugged it off, attributing it to my overactive imagination. As evening fell, we gathered in the main room, where the organizer kicked off the night with a few icebreaker games. Everyone seemed eager to participate, laughing and chatting, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was simmering beneath the surface. After the games, he announced the first activity, a scavenger hunt in the woods. Reluctantly, I joined a small group of people, and we ventured out into the darkened forest. Flashlights flickering, we searched for items that were hidden along the path. At first, it felt innocent enough, but as we wandered deeper into the woods, things started to feel strange. We stumbled across odd symbols carved into the trees and remnants of what looked like old campfires. The atmosphere shifted, the laughter faded, replaced by an unsettling silence that seemed to wrap around us like a thick shroud. When we finally returned to the cabin, the others were buzzing with excitement, sharing their finds and experiences. But I felt a gnawing unease that I couldn't shake. I excused myself and retreated to my room, hoping to gather my thoughts. As I lay in bed, I could hear laughter and distant music filtering through the walls, but it felt hollow, almost forced. Around midnight, I was jolted awake by a loud crash from outside. My heart raced as I listened, straining to hear what was happening. I got up and peeked out the window, my pulse quickening as I saw a group of people gathered around a fire pit. The flames flickered wildly, casting shadows on their faces, and they appeared to be engaged in some kind of ritual. They were dancing, moving in sync with one another, their voices rising in a chant that sent chills down my spine. I backed away from the window, my breath quickening. I had to get out of there. I snuck out of my room, careful not to be seen, and made my way to the front door. As I stepped outside, the cold night air hit me like a slap to the face. I was about to make a break for my car when I caught sight of the group again. They were now standing in a circle, and at the center lay something that looked disturbingly like an animal, still and quiet. I froze, my mind racing. What kind of event was this? I turned to run back inside, but before I could reach the door, I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was the organizer, his smile now twisted and unsettling. I didn't even think. I pushed past him and sprinted into the woods, branches tearing at my clothes as I ran. I didn't stop until I reached my car, fumbling with my keys as panic set in. I finally got the door open and jumped inside, slamming it shut behind me. I peeled out of the driveway, not daring to look back. As I drove away, my heart racing and adrenaline pumping, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. That weekend was meant to be an escape, a chance to connect with others, but instead, it turned into a nightmare. I never went back to Craigslist after that night, and I still wonder how many others were drawn in by the same post, unaware of the darkness lurking just beneath the surface. I've always been a bit of a Craigslist junkie. You could say it's a guilty pleasure. I'd scroll through the free section like it was my personal treasure hunt, looking for the oddest things people were willing to part with. Most of the time, it was just junk, broken furniture, old appliances, and the occasional weird collection of porcelain dolls that someone swore had great sentimental value. But one night, while I was deep in my scrolling, I came across a post that made my heart race. Free vintage video game console. Must pick up tonight. Now, I'm not a gamer in the traditional sense, but I do have a soft spot for nostalgia. The thought of an old console brought back memories of my childhood spent at my friend Kyle's house, where we'd battle it out in pixelated glory. I clicked on a post, and my fingers tingled with excitement. The ad was sparse, just a few lines and a peculiar email address that looked like a jumble of letters and numbers. After a few minutes of hesitation, I decided to shoot a message. I was surprised when I got a response almost immediately. The sender, who went by Dave, said he lived about 30 minutes away in a rundown part of town. He mentioned he was moving and needed to get rid of it fast. I felt a little uneasy about the whole thing, the urgency in his email and the vague details about the console. But the excitement outweighed my caution, and I agreed to come by in an hour. As I drove, the streets grew dimmer and the houses more decrepit. I passed what looked like abandoned cars and overgrown lawns, a stark contrast to the neighborhood I lived in. My gut twisted a bit, but I shrugged it off, convincing myself this was a harmless adventure. I followed the GPS to a small, crumbling house at the end of a dead-end street. The paint was peeling, and the windows were either boarded up or had been covered with dark curtains. I knocked on the front door. It creaked open just enough for me to see a sliver of a dimly lit room inside. It smelled musty, like something had been left to rot. I called out, but there was no answer. I stood there for a moment, my heart racing as I felt the chill of the evening air wrap around me. I was about to turn and leave when I heard a rustling sound from inside, followed by heavy footsteps. Dave finally appeared, a tall figure with unkempt hair and a scruffy beard. He was wearing a stained t-shirt and cargo shorts that looked like they'd seen better days. He gestured me inside, and I hesitated for a second before stepping into the dim light. The living room was cluttered, filled with old furniture and boxes piled high. In the corner, I spotted the console, a dusty relic of the past. Dave seemed eager to get rid of it, shoving it into my hands without much explanation. I noticed a strange glint in his eye as he watched me. There was something unsettling about the way he moved, like he was too jittery, too excited. I tried to shake off the feeling as I thanked him and made my way back outside. Once I got into my car, I took a closer look at the console. It was definitely vintage, with a few old games stacked beside it. I felt a rush of satisfaction, thinking about all the fun I'd have reliving my childhood. But then I noticed something odd. The console had a strange, sticky residue on it, and the games seemed to have smudges, almost like they'd been handled without care. As I drove home, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I spent the rest of the night cleaning the console, wiping it down with a cloth until it gleamed. The games went through a similar treatment. After a few hours, I finally set it up in my living room, excited to dive into some nostalgia. Everything was fine for the first couple of days. I played a few games, and it felt good to escape into that world. But as I continued to play, I started noticing strange glitches. Characters would behave erratically, the screen would flicker, and sometimes I could swear I heard faint whispers coming from the speakers. I chalked it up to a faulty console, but it left me feeling uneasy. Things took a darker turn one night when I was playing a particularly intense level. The game suddenly froze, and the screen went black. I tapped a few buttons, but nothing happened. That's when I heard it, a low guttural voice emanating from the speakers, whispering something unintelligible. I jumped back, my heart pounding in my chest. I thought I was losing it. I unplugged the console, convinced I'd had enough. But the next day, curiosity got the better of me. I plugged it back in, thinking maybe it was just a fluke. I started a new game, and everything seemed normal until I reached a certain point. The voice returned, clearer this time, almost pleading. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was desperate. That's when I decided to dig deeper. I hopped on my laptop and started searching for information on the console. I found forums filled with stories of haunted video games and strange occurrences linked to retro consoles. Some people claimed they felt watched while playing, others spoke of nightmares that followed. The deeper I went, the more unsettling the tales became. Feeling paranoid, I tried to contact Dave to ask him about the console's history. I shot him an email, hoping to get some answers, but I received no response. Days turned into weeks, and I started feeling like I was being watched in my own home. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong with the console, that it was somehow connected to Dave and that eerie house. Finally, I decided to get rid of it. I packed it all up and took it back to the same neighborhood, hoping to leave it on the curb for someone else to find. As I approached the house, my stomach churned. I could feel the weight of the place pressing down on me. I left the console there, but before I turned to leave, I glanced back at the house. That's when I saw him. Dave stood at the window, watching me with those unsettling eyes, a twisted smile creeping across his face. I bolted back to my car, heart racing, and drove away, not looking back. To this day, I don't know what was really going on with that console, or what happened to it afterward. I like to think I made the right choice, but sometimes late at night, when I'm flipping through channels or scrolling aimlessly online, I wonder if someone else picked it up and is now tangled up in whatever darkness it held. I've learned my lesson about Craigslist treasures, but the memory of that night still lingers, a haunting reminder of the line between nostalgia and something much darker. I never thought I'd end up in a situation like that, but here I am, sitting in front of my computer, trying to piece together what happened. It all started one bored Saturday afternoon when I was scrolling through Craigslist, looking for something to do. You know how it goes. You end up down a rabbit hole of random ads that range from the mundane to the bizarre. I was just scrolling through the free section when I stumbled upon an ad that caught my eye. It was simple, almost too simple. Just a single line that read, "Looking for someone to help with project. Pay offered." I had nothing else going on, and I was kind of desperate for cash. Being a freelance graphic designer had its ups and downs, and at that moment, it was a definite down. I clicked on the ad, my curiosity piqued. The poster had left their email, so I shot them a quick message asking what the project was about. I didn't think much of it at the time. I figured it was just some odd job like helping someone move or cleaning out a garage. To my surprise, I got a reply almost immediately. The person, who went by Mark, explained that he needed help with a creative project that involved some photography and a little bit of art. He didn't go into details, but he promised it would be fun and that he was willing to pay a decent amount of cash. I hesitated for a moment. The whole thing felt a bit off, but then again, I shrugged it off. I needed the money, and how bad could it be? We agreed to meet in a public park, which felt like a decent enough compromise. I arrived early, pacing around and trying to calm my nerves. Mark looked like your average guy, maybe in his late 30s, a little scruffy but not entirely unkempt. He was friendly enough, and after a brief chat, I started to feel a little more at ease. He explained that he was an artist working on a series of photos that included unusual subjects. I was intrigued, and I figured this was just a quirky art project. Mark led me to his car, and we drove to a secluded part of the park, away from the usual crowds. That's when things started to feel weird. The area was quiet, almost eerily so, and as we got out, I noticed that the trees around us were thick, casting long shadows that made everything feel a little darker. Mark pulled out his camera and a few props, things like masks and fake blood. I thought he was joking at first, but as he set everything up, I realized he was serious. I was standing there, feeling a mix of confusion and apprehension, but I told myself to just roll with it. He explained that he wanted to create a series of narrative photos that would tell a story, something dark and edgy. I didn't love the idea, but I was stuck there, and I figured I could just humor him and get my money at the end of it all. As we began to shoot, I started to feel more uncomfortable. The poses he wanted me to do were increasingly bizarre, sitting on the ground with a mask on, pretending to be terrified while he snapped away. At one point, he even splattered some fake blood on my shirt, which I thought was pushing it a bit far. I wanted to leave, but I kept telling myself that it was just a harmless art project. After a while, I noticed that Mark was becoming increasingly focused. He didn't just want to take pictures, he wanted to create a scene. He started directing me more intensely, and I could feel the excitement in his voice. It was almost manic. I felt trapped, like I had stepped into a horror movie, and I was the unsuspecting victim. But I didn't want to be rude, especially since I still hadn't been paid. Then came the moment that sent my heart racing. Mark pulled out a large piece of canvas and laid it on the ground. He told me he wanted to do something different, something that would really make the photos pop. I watched in disbelief as he began to pour red paint onto the canvas, creating what looked like a violent splatter. I could see the excitement in his eyes, but it wasn't the kind of excitement that made me feel safe. It was the kind that sent a chill down my spine. I tried to back away, suggesting we take a break. I wasn't sure how to get out of the situation without making it obvious that I was scared. Mark, however, seemed oblivious to my discomfort. He was completely absorbed in his creation, and I felt like I was in the way rather than the subject. The more he focused on the canvas, the more uneasy I became. Finally, I managed to step back and said that I needed to leave. I could feel the tension in the air, like a thick fog creeping in around us. Mark turned to me with a look I can only describe as almost predatory. He didn't say anything for a moment, just stared. I could feel my heart racing as I took a step back again, this time more urgently. In a split second, my instincts kicked in. I turned and ran. I didn't look back, just sprinted through the trees and back towards the main path. I could hear him calling after me, but I didn't stop. When I finally burst into the open area of the park, I didn't slow down until I reached a group of people. Only then did I finally take a breath, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking as I got inside and locked the doors. I drove home in a daze, replaying the whole thing over and over in my mind. What had I just experienced? I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped something really disturbing. Looking back, I realized I should have trusted my gut, but in that moment, I was blinded by the need for cash and the allure of something unusual. It's funny how quickly things can go south, how one moment of curiosity can lead you into the unknown. Now, I stick to regular gigs, steering clear of anything that feels even slightly off. Because sometimes, in the depths of Craigslist, you find more than just odd jobs. You find a glimpse into the darkness that lurks beneath the surface. I have a story that still sends chills down my spine whenever I think about it. I was scrolling through Craigslist one late night, aimlessly searching for random items I probably didn't need. I stumbled upon a post that caught my attention. It wasn't your usual furniture or job listing. The title read something like, "Unique Opportunity for the Brave." It was posted by someone who called themselves The Collector. The description was vague but tantalizing, hinting at rare artifacts and experiences that could only be had if you were willing to visit their private collection. The Collector claimed to have items from all over the world, some with dark histories and others that were simply exotic. Curiosity piqued. I clicked through the pictures attached to the post. There were unsettling images of masks, strange artifacts, and what appeared to be a collection of taxidermy. My heart raced. This was not a typical Craigslist experience. It felt like I had stumbled upon something I wasn't supposed to see. Yet, I couldn't pull myself away from the screen. I was fully aware of the risks involved in meeting strangers from the internet, but something about the allure of the unknown pulled me in. I sat there for a while, contemplating whether I should reach out. I thought about the thrill of a hidden world, the possibility of meeting someone who could share their stories behind these bizarre objects. I eventually decided to take the plunge and shot off a quick email expressing interest. It didn't take long for the collector to respond with an invitation to visit his home. The next day, I found myself driving to a secluded part of town, the kind of area that felt almost forgotten. The houses were spaced out, and the trees loomed like sentinels. I turned onto a long gravel driveway that wound its way to an old Victorian home, its paint peeling and windows clouded with age. As I parked, unease washed over me, but the thrill of adventure made me push it aside. I approached the front door, which creaked open as if it had been waiting for me. The collector was standing there, a gaunt figure dressed in a long coat that seemed out of place. He welcomed me inside with a nod, and I stepped into a dimly lit hallway that smelled of dust and something else. I couldn't quite place it. The walls were lined with shelves filled with oddities, jars of preserved specimens, ancient-looking trinkets, and books that looked like they hadn't been opened in decades. He gestured me to follow him into a large room at the back, where the Real collection was housed. The moment I stepped in, I was struck by the sheer volume of items crammed into the space. It felt like entering a museum of the macabre. There were artifacts that looked like they belonged in a horror film, dried animal parts, ceremonial masks, and objects I couldn't identify. My heart raced with both fear and fascination. The collector walked me through his collection, pointing out various items with pride. He spoke in riddles, weaving tales of their origins, how he acquired them, the people he met, and the places he traveled. There was a sense of madness in his enthusiasm, but I couldn't look away. I was captivated. In the corner of the room, I spotted a large, ornate chest. It was different from everything else, almost too polished in contrast to the rest of the chaotic space. The collector noticed my gaze and shuffled over, his eyes gleaming. He told me that the chest contained something special, something that required the right mindset to appreciate. It was like he was trying to draw me in further, and I was more than willing to indulge him. As he opened the chest, I felt a rush of adrenaline. Inside, there was a collection of small, intricately carved figurines that looked like they were made from bone. They had a haunting beauty, but there was something unsettling about them too. The collector explained that they were crafted by a tribe known for their dark rituals, and each figure represented a different aspect of life and death. I couldn't help but feel a sense of dread creeping in. The energy in the room shifted, and I could see the glint of something dark in the collector's eyes as he spoke. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, and I felt a chill run down my spine. The way he recounted the stories of each figure felt almost like a warning, but I was too entranced to back away. He offered me one of the figurines, claiming that it would bring me luck if I treated it well. I hesitated, my instinct screaming at me to leave, but the allure of the unknown kept me rooted in place. I took the figurine, feeling the coldness of the bone against my skin. It felt wrong, like taking a part of something that should remain buried. After what felt like hours of exploring and listening to the collector's tales, I finally made my excuses to leave. The journey back felt surreal. I was overwhelmed with a mix of exhilaration and dread. Once home, I placed the figurine on my shelf, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had invited something sinister into my life. Days turned into weeks. Strange things began to happen. I'd hear whispers in the night, shadows darting just out of the corner of my eye. My dreams became vivid and unsettling. I could feel a weight pressing down on me, as if the figurine had tethered something dark to my existence. I tried to convince myself it was all in my head, that I was just imagining things, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. I decided to reach out to the collector, but when I returned to Craigslist, I found his post gone. I searched his name, but nothing came up. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. Panic set in. I felt trapped, like I had stepped into something that didn't let me leave. I tried to get rid of the figurine, but each time I attempted to throw it away, it would somehow find its way back to me. I was losing my grip on reality, feeling like I was being followed. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I packed the figurine in a box and drove back to that old Victorian house, praying that the collector would be there. I arrived heart pounding, but the house stood silent, an eerie shell of its former self. I knocked, but no one answered. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, the weight of the figurine heavy in my pocket. Finally, I left, feeling defeated. As I drove away, I glanced back at the house one last time, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I saw a figure standing in the window, watching me leave. It's been months since that day, but I still feel the weight of that choice pressing down on me. I don't know where the collector went or what I truly brought into my life that day, but I can't shake the feeling that something dark is still lurking, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. It was one of those late nights where boredom takes hold and the glow of your phone screen becomes the most interesting thing in the world. I was scrolling through Craigslist, mostly out of sheer curiosity and a pinch of desperation to find something to fill my time. You know how it goes, a few missed connections, some odd job postings, and the occasional bizarre item for sale. I stumbled across an ad titled "Free Furniture, Must Pick Up Tonight." Normally, I'd skip past it, but something about the urgency in the description caught my attention. They said they were moving out and needed everything gone by dawn. It felt like fate calling, or maybe just a bad idea waiting to happen. The address was in a part of town I wasn't super familiar with, but it was only a 20-minute drive. I figured I could grab a couple of chairs and possibly a table for my apartment. My furniture situation was pretty sad, an old couch and a couple of mismatched chairs I'd picked up over the years. The thought of upgrading for free was too tempting. I texted the number in the ad, and before I knew it, I was on my way, excitement bubbling in my stomach. As I drove through the dimly lit streets, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease creeping in. The neighborhood seemed a little run down, with flickering streetlights and a few stray cats darting across the road. Still, I reassured myself that it was just furniture, nothing more. When I pulled up to the house, I felt my heart race a bit. The place was a small, old bungalow that had seen better days. Paint was peeling, and the yard was overgrown with weeds. I parked and stepped out, a chill running down my spine as I approached the front door. Knocking felt like a bad idea, so I just pushed the door open. It creaked ominously, and I half expected someone to jump out and yell at me for trespassing. Instead, the house was eerily quiet. I called out, but only silence answered back. The living room was dimly lit by a single bulb hanging from the ceiling. It flickered slightly, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I spotted a worn sofa and a couple of mismatched chairs, just like the ad had promised. But something felt off. As I moved through the house, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The air was thick with an unsettling tension. I walked into the kitchen, and that's when I saw it, a giant old wooden table covered in what looked like old newspapers. As I got closer, I realized the papers were yellowed and crinkled, scattered across the surface almost haphazardly. The headlines were bizarre, focusing on local disappearances and strange occurrences in the area. It felt like a bad horror movie, the kind where you want to yell at the protagonist to get out while they still can. I tried to shake off the creeping dread and focused on the furniture. I started dragging the chair toward the door when I noticed a door slightly ajar at the end of the hallway. My curiosity got the better of me. I approached it, heart pounding in my chest, and pushed it open. It led to a small, dark room that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. The only light source was from a small window, and what I saw made my stomach turn. The room was filled with boxes, but not just any boxes. These were filled with old clothing, shoes, and personal items that looked like they belonged to various people. There were kids' toys and old photographs scattered around, all of them faded and torn. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized these items looked like they belonged to people who had gone missing. Panic set in, and I stumbled back toward the hallway, almost tripping over my own feet. I needed to get out of there. The furniture wasn't worth this feeling of impending doom. I rushed back to the living room, grabbing one of the chairs and dragging it toward the door. That's when I heard it, a soft sound coming from the back of the house, almost like a faint whimper. My instincts kicked in, and I froze, straining to hear. The sound was distant, but it was unmistakable. Something was in the house. I felt my throat dry up, and I fought the urge to scream. I couldn't just leave now. I had to know what was making that noise, even though every fiber of my being screamed at me to run. I dropped the chair and crept toward the back of the house, every step feeling like 1,000 pounds pressing down on me. I reached another door, this one closed tight. My heart raced as I pressed my ear against it, and that's when I heard it again, clearer this time, a soft, pleading sound. It was coming from behind that door. I mustered all my courage and turned the knob, pushing the door open slowly. The room was dark, and I could barely make out the shapes inside. As my eyes adjusted, I saw what looked like a small figure huddled in the corner of the room. It was a child, maybe 8 or 9 years old, with dirty clothes and wild hair. The sight was heartbreaking and terrifying all at once. I couldn't understand how a child could be here, in this house, in this situation. I wanted to reach out to help, but as I took a step closer, the child flinched, pressing themselves further into the corner. They looked terrified, eyes wide with fear, and I realized I had to get out. I backed away slowly, not wanting to provoke whatever had brought me here. I bolted for the front door, adrenaline coursing through my veins. I didn't stop until I was back in my car, shaking and gasping for breath. As I drove away, I couldn't shake the image of that child from my mind. I didn't know how long they had been there, or what kind of horrors they had faced. I thought about calling the police, but who would believe my wild story? The furniture was long forgotten, and all I could think about was the feeling of dread that had followed me through that house. That night, I couldn't sleep, plagued by nightmares and the chilling thought that there were darker things hidden beneath the surface of everyday life. I still think about that child, and I hope they found a way out, a way to escape whatever nightmare had trapped them in that house. And I learned a lesson about those Craigslist ads